Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. So reading from Srila Prabhupada, Leelamrita. Jagadath Sridesi. When I was distributing Prabhupada's books, I understood that this was the most pleasing thing I could do for him. I was helping him to fulfill his spiritual master's instructions, and so he was pleased, and he was even more pleased if I did it nicely. I always used to hear the story about how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would be happy if someone went out and distributed even one magazine, because it's actually the mood of Sankirtan of going out and trying to give mercy to the conditioned souls that counts. I always wanted to do welfare work. I like the feeling of doing something for people. So this is the sum and bonum of helping people. You are helping them to go back to Godhead. So that was my motivation. And we automatically became purified by bringing other living entities to Krishna, Tripurari. I got inspired mostly by Prabhupada's greatness, how he was staunchly following his Guru Maharaj. It was his Guru Maharaj's order, and therefore he was doing it. I was never very scholarly or intelligent. I never thought I had much brains or talent. I was never trained practically in any kind of skill, and I didn't have much education. I took it like that. And I was talking to the most fallen people, that I was the most fallen myself, and I was the most fallen myself. I was just doing what Prabhupada wanted because he wanted. I would pray to Prabhupada to help me realize why he wanted book distribution. Then within, I would get inspiration. It would come out in all of my talks about book distribution. That time that I stayed out at the airport when all the devotees went back with Prabhupada to the temple very much affected my whole spiritual life. I was very much intimately connected with Prabhupada, but my closest association with him was by following his instructions and just getting down to work and not trying to enjoy the spiritual master, but serve him. Vrindavan Vilasini Devidasi. When Prabhupada gave that famous lecture in Los Angeles, distribute books, distribute books, distribute books. Right then, I wanted to take it up. Whenever he wrote to Rameshwar, it was rarely to Rameshwar and company. We all felt included. We're all eternal book distributors, a team together. And I wanted to be part of it. It was Lord Chaitanya's Eternal Sankirtan Party, and we all wanted to be part of it. It's going on in every planet, in every universe. I know it is pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. I would relate to book distribution like the Battle of Kurukshetra. It's a battle, for Krishna is right there. It's like Kurukshetra number 2. I'm sure all book distributors feel like that. You feel like Krishna is right there and he's going to win. You just have to take shelter of him. You may not win this battle, but you win the overall war. So I always felt connected with Prabhupada because he's telling us in his books about the great devotees that we can take shelter of. It's all by his mercy. He's giving us these books and he's in these books. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Transcendental book distribution ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's Canto 5, Chapter 4, the characteristics of Rishadev, and it's text 19. So I'll just run through the Sanskrit. Sa kadachit atmano bhagavan Rishabha Brahmavata Gato Brahmashi Pravara Savyam Prajanam Nishamayantina Atmajan Avadhitamana Prashraya Pranaya Bara Suyanti Tritan Upashikshayan Iti Hovacha. Responsibly, please. Saha He Kadachit once Atmana Vayanto Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rishabha, Lord Rishabha. Brahmavatagata. When he reached the place known as Brahmavata, identified by some as Boma, by others as a place near Kanpura, Uttar Pradesh.
When he reached the place known as Brahmavata, identified by some as Burma and by others as a place near Kanpura, Uttar Pradesh.
Brahma Rishi Pravara Savayam.
Brahma Rishi Pravara Savayam.
In a meeting of first-class Brahmins.
In a meeting of first-class Brahmins.
Prajanan, while the citizens.
While the citizens.
Nishamayantinam. We're hearing Atmajan, his sons, Avahita Atmana, attentive, Prashraya, of good behavior, Pranaya, of devotion, Bara, by an abundance, Suyantritan, well controlled, Api, although, Upashikshayan, teaching, Iti, thus, Ha, certainly, Uvacha, said. Translation. Once while touring the world, Lord Rishabdev, the Supreme Lord, reached a place known as Brahmavata. There was a great conference of learned Brahmins at that place, and all the king's sons attentively heard the instructions of the Brahmins there. At that assembly, within the hearing of the citizens, Rishabdev instructed his sons, although they were already very well behaved, devoted, and qualified. He instructed them so that in the future they could rule the world very perfectly. Thus he spoke as follows. The instructions of Lord Rishabdev to his sons are very valuable if one wants to live peacefully within this world, which is full of miseries. In the next chapter, Lord Rishabdev gives his sons these valuable instructions. Thus end the Bhagavatam of the 5th canto, 4th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Characteristics of Rishabdev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Jnana Tamarana Shaganana Shalakaya Chakshirannaritanjena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasari Gaura Bhattarinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vanshikapasubhyascha Kripasindhuvyevacha Harinam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we're continuing on here with Lord Rishabdev, and now the most important part of Lord Rishabdev's incarnation on earth is his teachings. The Vani is more important than the Bhagavad, and through the Vani, sometimes we can also experience the Bhagavad, just like Tripavari. Maharaj was just saying in the Prabhupada Nilamrita that the day all the devotees went back to see Prabhupada at the temple, he stayed out, and he felt all connected to Prabhupada and going back to see him personally. So in the same way, those that take the instructions of Lord Rishabdev, then they become more intimately connected with the Lord than those who just saw him. So some interesting points to meditate on. One point which is quite interesting is towards the end of the translation, it says, Rishadev instructed his sons, although they were already very well behaved, devoted, and qualified. So it's interesting that although they didn't need the instruction necessarily, Lord Rishadev was still inclined to want to give them instructions. So part of the reason for that would be so that we can hear those instructions. Just the same as Arjuna didn't really need the instructions. Krishna put him into a situation so that he would give the instructions. So quite a lot of what's going on in the Srimad Bhagavatam, very elevated personalities, and they're being put into particular situations so that we can receive the instructions. So we should be careful not to make the mistake of being critical in our mind about an apparent mistake that a great personality makes, and understand that it's there for us to learn from, to take a lesson from. And that's a very good tip anyway in the association of devotees, because we're supposed to respect all the devotees, show respect to others, and expect their respect ourselves. So that means seeing all the devotees as special personalities that take up devotional service. And so not to be so quick to see the faults and criticize, but to try and see that there's something here for me to learn. They say if you can spot it, it means you've got it. But what that really means is if somebody is displaying idiosyncrasy, which is very disturbing to you, if you're very disturbed, then you should look at why you're very disturbed. Because that's more of a problem than whatever the apparent problem is that the person has that's disturbing you. They say it's not what happens to you that hurts you, it's your story of what happens to you that hurts you. And although we're not in control of what happens to us, we're all in control of what stories we want to tell about what happens to us. And you can change the story of what happened to you. And if you change the story, then you can change the way you relate to what's happening to you as well. So you can take an event where you were a victim, and then you can tell the story from the perspective that it was your fault. And it's interesting when you do that, because there's a lot of details that you leave out when it's not your fault. And when you take it that it is your fault, suddenly there's all these other details, there's other insights that we weren't allowing ourselves to connect to. Anyway, so the sons were instructed, although they didn't need to be instructed, and that was for our benefit. And they were given those instructions so that they could rule the world very perfectly. So that's the very first verse in the Nectar of Instruction, Vachi Vegan, Manasukoli Vegan, Jiva Vegan, Udarapasta Vegan, Eitan Vegan, Yogishantadera, Sadmakaran Petibim Shishat. So Shishat is disciples, and saying, right in the very first instruction from Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Instruction, saying that we should become qualified to make disciples all over the world. So there's different ways you can look at that. It may not necessarily mean that you're going around the world giving people diksha and giving them different names, but it can also mean that you're ruling the world in the sense that you are giving people direction in the way to go with their lives, giving them meaning to their lives. And Prabhupada said one time a devotee wrote to him and said he was overwhelmed by all those responsibilities. And Prabhupada said, I've created these big programs just to engage my big men, but if one sincerely preaches to just one person every day, then that is sufficient. So in that sense, that's something we can all do. We can all find someone, a fellow devotee that's maybe struggling at the time, and help them. And in this way we can rule the world very perfectly. We're like, because the people that are leading the world are apparently leading the world right now, are not actually leading the world. They are puppets in the hands of Kali, and Kali has his agenda, and they're acting out whatever he wants to take place They're not the real leaders when they assign conspiracy theories. Oh, these men were in a dark room, a smoky dark room, all crowded around their desk, thinking of evil ways they could hurt humanity. But it's not really up to them. They will just act according to the karma of the people in general, and things will take place. So they're not really leaders, they're more pawns in the game. The real leaders are the devas. And those that are worshipping and serving Krishna are also devas as well. And so we can have more of an impact on what happens on the earth than apparent leaders who seem to have so much weaponry and influence at their disposal. So for that reason, we should be eager to accept instruction, even if we don't think we need the instruction. One of the first instructions is that we always need instruction. So as soon as we don't think we need instruction, then we're disobeying that instruction. And if someone is instructing us and we're already doing it, then that's great, because then we can be thinking, well, I'm doing that anyway, so that's fine. And if they're instructing us and it's something that we're not doing, we're neglecting, then that's also good, because it means we can improve. Always better service. We can always improve. Wherever the service is, we can always do it better. So there's no room for pride that I'm doing the service. There's no way it can be done any better than it is being done right now. I am chanting my rounds the best possible way that can be chanted, and doing everything in the most perfect and possibly perfect way that can be done. And there's always room, plenty of room. And as we become more Krishna conscious, then our standards of what we consider acceptable also start to increase. And if we want to improve our japa, then we have to be dissatisfied with the japa that we're chanting at present. Otherwise, where's the incentive to want to improve? So it's usually at the point of infuriation that we decide we need to move forward now. When we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, that's when we can stop being sick and tired. So, okay, that's enough. I need to just push on now. Do something for Prabhupada. Prabhupada said to all these big men one time, he said, you've all got 50 years. What are you going to do with them? So that means for different things for different devotees. If you've been a devotee for 40 years, then you should be thinking, I've only got 10 years left. What am I going to do with it? Any questions or comments? I'll read the translation again, see if there's any questions. Once around the world, Lord Rishikesh, the Supreme Lord, reached a place known as Brahmapata. There was a great conference of learned Brahmins in that place, and all the king's sons attentively heard the instructions of the Brahmins there. At the assembly, within the hearing of the citizens, Rishikesh instructed his sons, although they were already very well behaved, devoted, and qualified. He instructed them so that in the future they could rule the world very perfectly. Thus he spoke as follows. So it's interesting also, Rishikesh was aware that the citizens could hear, so although he was instructing his sons, it was so the citizens could hear. The story like that is the mother wanted to instruct her daughter-in-law, so she brought her own daughter in and told her own daughter off in front of the daughter-in-law. So rather than the daughter-in-law being chastised, her daughter-in-law saw her mother-in-law's daughter being chastised, and in this way, her mother was able to chastise her daughter-in-law, and she knew if she tried to do it directly, the daughter-in-law wouldn't be able to take it. So she did it in an indirect way. That's actually what's nice about book distribution, is that we're not directly telling people that they're fools, or directly telling people that we're animals, but if they read the books, and that's what the books are saying. It was nice yesterday, we had to move pallets around, because there's some books going to be going to some other places in pallets, which is really, really nice to see. So we're moving all the books around so we can get access to some of the books. And as the books are moving around, I was just looking at all the Bhagavad Gitas that we have there and thinking, Krishna, 5,000 years ago, said to Arjuna on the battlefield, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. And because Krishna is all-knowing, and he knew that that instruction would be printed and bound and stacked up on pallets hundreds and thousands of times, and he knew that there'd be some going to Les Mahego in our warehouse. And every single book in our warehouse has somebody's name on it. That book is meant for somebody. And interestingly enough, actually, Amita at one time was in charge of the book warehouse for the UK, and they did a survey, and they just wanted to know how many people had joined because they received the book directly from a devotee. And the interesting statistic was that generally the person that joined was the fifth person to receive the book. So the person gets the book on the street, he's not really interested, he gives it to his friend says, thank you very much. He's not interested, he gives it to his friend, he says, thank you very much. He's not interested, he gives it to his friend, who gives it to his friend, who does read the book, and then joins. So there's amazing arrangements going on. And there's I get a newsletter from Vijay, and the latest one is called Time Bomb. And this book, Science of Civilization, this girl's father received it on the street, put it on the bookshelf, 30 years, it just sat on the bookshelf. And then one day she just was attracted, started reading, and then immediately when she met the devotees, she wanted to buy lots of books off them. And she looks like she'll be taking serious steps forward in her Krishna consciousness. So the main thing is to get the books out. And I think a good sign is if you can go to a local hospital, and as you're walking to the inpatients, along the way, as you're looking, you can see all the books stacked up in the different offices that are there in the hospital. And 2 times I saw Srila Prabhupada's books in the hospital, books just stacked up against the window. One was the Krishna book, and they really stand out like anything. I think, oh, that's pretty good. That's a sign that the area is getting saturated with books when they're starting to pop up on shelves in hospitals. And we passed out a lot of books in Scotland, close to 2 million, maybe over 2 million books. And there's only like 5 million people in Scotland. So that's, anyway, always better service, so you can always be passing out more books. And it looks like some of the books may be going into prisons. One of our contacts in the congregation is looking into putting the Bhagavad Gitas into prisons. So that'll be good because they become very interested when they're in prison about thinking what it's all about. And there was a book that the Buddhists did for prisons, and it was called "We Are All Doing Time." It was explained to the prisoners that even when you get out, you're still in prison. It's just that if you're in prison, it's more apparent that you're in prison than when you're out of prison. And if you look at the way people, I mean, right now the pandemic has slowed things down a bit, but one thing I used to notice quite a lot when I was going around doing my Sankirtan was how the people are all in prison because they all have to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they all have to leave at 5:30, and then they'll have to go back again the next day. They can't just decide, I'm going to go and take my shoes and socks off and wander in this grass field that I can see over here and pick some daisies and smell them. So they're serving a sentence, and their crime is that they want material things. So because of that, they end up in debt, and then they have to pay off So then they become sentenced to 25 years hard labor. It's probably more than 25 years, probably more like 35 years hard labor. And in fact, they're trying to extend the age of retirement. It was 65, then it was 66 and a half. I'm not sure what it is now. So if you leave school and you start a job at 20, then you're sentenced to maybe 50 years hard labor. So that's why the Buddhists did the book out. We're all doing time. Everyone's imprisoned. And although the devotees are very busy and they keep to schedules and there's so many things that they have to attend to, they don't feel like they're in prison. Everything to them is like recreation because they're doing it voluntarily. Especially when they come to the stage of actually getting a taste for wanting to do it. Like one devotee confessed, one of the members of the GBC confessed, I can't chant 16 rounds. And all the GBC members were looking around at him and he shouldn't be saying that in public. And he says, no, I can't put my bead bag down after 16 rounds, so I can't just chant 16 rounds. So it should get to the point that not only do we like what we're doing, but we can't stop what we're doing. So that's a totally different world to people that are enslaved in the system, whether they're actually in prison or they're just imprisoned with paying for material things that they don't really need. In fact, I had an interesting analysis. People are working really, really hard to pay for cars, to drive to places to earn the money to pay for the cars. So if you decided you didn't need a car, then you wouldn't have to go to the place to work. And the way the system works is I give you a piece of dough and I ask you to make 5 loaves. So you break the dough into 5 pieces, roll them in balls, you put them in the oven, and they come out, and then you give me the 5 loaves, and then I give you threepence for making the 5 loaves. And then I ask you, would you like a loaf yourself? And you say, yes, please. And you say, okay, that'll be threepence. So that's the way the system works. So people are all enslaved in the system. And we have books that can free them, that can help them to understand what is the real goal and how to get free once and for all from all the material entanglements. And that's a great relief for people to understand that, to see that there's that things start to make sense. There was this lady, actually, she was born blind and she was born dumb as well. And she was put into a special kind of like, because they thought she was also insane as well because of the way that she behaved. And so they put her in this special kind of like unit where she was kind of imprisoned. And then this lady was trying to teach her, and this lady was convinced that this person wasn't insane. But what she noticed was whenever this young girl would throw a tantrum, then to calm her down, they would give her some sweets. So she stopped doing that. And she was trying to get the girl to understand language and trying to teach her. You can imagine it was very difficult. She was deaf, dumb, and blind. And one day she was annoyed because she was throwing a tantrum trying to get some sweets again. So she picked up the nurse lady picked up a pitcher of water and she threw it over her face. And as she threw it over her face, she went like that with her hands. And the girl was feeling her hand. And she threw the water over again and made the sign with her hand. And then it clicked that was this. So then she ran over to landing, and she banged the landing, and then she showed what that meant, and then she ran over to the table and she banged that, and she showed what that meant. And then she started to be able to understand, and then she became a really, really clever person, you know. She was able to understand hand language, and then everything else started to build up from there. So people in the material world are like that. They're blind, deaf, and dumb, and we're trying to show them how to make some sense. We're trying to get them to connect and understand. And Srila Prabhupada's books can do that. And then once things start to mean something, then spiritual life starts to begin, because then they can start to ask questions. Well, what does this mean? Why is this like this? Why am I suffering? Why is it temporary? Why is this? Why is that? Why is that? And they can start, and then all the questions are there, you know. All the questions that we had when we were children, actually, that got drummed up is by the educational system. Because the whole idea of education is to encourage inquisitiveness and curiosity, but it does the very opposite. It makes you feel foolish to ask the questions in the first place. So then we become consigned to a conspiracy of ignorance. And you're only considered intelligent if you're not honest about how ignorant you are. So you just pretend that you're not. Like the king with no clothes, so everybody just says, oh, wear amazing clothes. And Prabhupada stood up and said, the king's naked, material world is miserable. And everybody was like, you don't say that, we're all trying to pretend we're happy here. So Prabhupada was like the little boy that stood up and said, the king is naked. And everybody, actually, I think the king is actually naked, you know. If I was to be honest about it. Any questions or comments? Shishiko Nitai Maya Pashashi Ki Jai. Shri Bhaktivinoda Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Jani Hariram Ki Jai. Shri Sri Bhagavatam Ki Jai. So the instructions that are about to come from Lord Rishabdev are very powerful, he said it in earrings with the citizens so that they could hear as well. So it was meant for the citizens then, and it's meant for the citizens now as well. And just like Lord Rishabdev, we should be keen to share those instructions. Father Rupa Goswami's instruction to make disciples all over the world. And we make disciples by just sitting down and discussing Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. We can do it online. We can have our little Zoom conferences. And as people become more educated about the value of the books, then automatically they'll want to share that information with others and take the books and distribute them. Just like preaching doesn't have such good connotations, so we like to say we share. So for some book distribution, and they maybe think, oh, making money and hustling people. But instead you can say, well, we're sharing, we're having living exchanges. Instead of saying we're going to go out on book distribution today, we're saying, today we're going to go out and have 6 living exchanges with all the people we meet. And everybody be, yeah, okay, that sounds really good. And on the way, we break it to them gently. That means we're going to be doing Sankirtan. Oh. But it's the same thing. It's the same as Harinam, actually. You're going out to share the holy names. So that's all we're doing. We're sharing with people the knowledge and the information that we have. And like that Mataji was saying in the Prabhupada Lila Amrita, if we have the right mood, then the result doesn't really matter. That's why Bhaktisiddhanta was satisfied if even one magazine was distributed. But if we have the right mood that we're going out to share with people a wonderful gift that we have, and people pick up on that our mood is giving, our mood is to share, then everything else will happen nicely, very nicely. For a lot of us, we were brought up on book distribution, and the time of the year where we really broke through barriers was during the Christmas marathon, when you realized you could do a lot more than you thought you could. And it got to the point where you didn't want to stop because you'd have to sleep and eat and then try and bring yourself back up to the same level you were at the day before. And you'd be thinking, it would be so nice just to be able to stay out for the whole month and not have to sleep or eat, because you'd find it hard to find people after a certain point in time. And sometimes we did find it hard to find people because we'd start at 9 o'clock and we wouldn't have the days worked out properly. I remember one time in Aberdeen, I was with Prabhupada Charan, and just at the top of Union Street I could see somebody walking down. So I was running up to try and stop that person, and Prabhupada saw somebody coming up from King Street at the bottom, so he was running off to see that person. Because the person was a bit alarmed actually to see somebody running up from a distance towards them. But it was usually good. They usually decided, whatever it is, I'm just going to do it. Then you pull the back out. And we're passing these out today. Okay, I'll take it. What do you want? So that was in our favour, definitely. Now, what was really eerie was on the Christmas Day and the New Year's Day was a real problem, because people didn't like you knocking on their doors. Everything was closed. Nobody was on the street. So it was really, really difficult. What would we do? And then Prabhupada Charan had a really, really bright idea. Why don't we go on the ships? And so that was really spooky, because everything was still. Nothing was happening. No pubs were open. Nothing. And you have to climb these gangways, and there's no security there because all the security are off. New Year's Day, Christmas Day. Who's going to want to do security? And even if they're supposed to be doing it, they're usually half drunk, sitting somewhere in one of those little cubicle things. So it was really easy to just sneak on. And then we'd find out where the captain of the ship was. So sometimes the captain of the ship would be a bit freaked out, meeting a monk on Christmas Day. But it would be good, because once the captain had helped, then he would let you go around all the crew members. And they were usually quite interested. There was nothing else happening for them on Christmas Day. So for them it was a nice surprise to get a book and meet this unusual monk from Lesmahago and get a Garanga fridge magnet. And the Garanga fridge magnets were good in the ships, because the ships are made out of iron, so you can stick them anywhere you want. So that was nice. The only thing that wasn't so nice was walking up the, sometimes it was like a kind of rope ladder with little planks of wood on it that you had to climb up. So that wasn't so nice. But it was a nice time of the year. A lot of books went out, and a lot of nice things happened. And it was a time of year when you broke through barriers or limitations that you'd maybe placed upon yourself, and then that would carry you through into the next year with a fresh outlook on what was possible, and that in fact anything was possible. So yeah, it was nice. Any questions or comments? So I'll just read the translation again. Once while touring the world, Lord Rishabdev, the Supreme Lord, reached a place known as Brahmavarta. There was a great conference of learned Brahmins at that place, and all the king's sons attentively heard the instructions of the Brahmins there. At that assembly, within the hearing of the citizens, Rishabdev instructed his sons, although they were already very well behaved, devoted, and qualified. He instructed them so that in the future they could rule the world very perfectly. Thus he spoke as follows. It's interesting, in Spanish the word educated, educado, means to be well behaved. So it's interesting, isn't it, that education is really not determined by how many facts you can regurgitate, but an educated person is one who can conduct himself in a very gentlemanly, cultured way. He has good manners and respect and observes social etiquette. So also if we're very well behaved, nicely dressed, nicely presented, Srila Prabhupada wanted that for the devotees on Sankirtan. And it gives people a good impression. And then they think this person must be well educated because of the way he's behaving. So that's real education. It's not necessarily that just by learning and remembering facts that you're going to be well educated. Okay, I'll finish with that. ISKCON Guru Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Go to Premanandi, Hari Hari Go. Hare Krishna.